Now, it's been nearly a month since the body of a black Mississippi teen, Nolan Wells, was found off the shore of Horn Island. Local authorities were quick to say
he was completely fine. That is how Warren Hudson, the young man who calls himself Nolan Wells' best friend, described Nolan's condition on July 4th in a sit-down interview he gave to conservative commentator Brandon Tatum. Completely fine. 3 weeks earlier, a Mississippi Marine Patrol official had written a different word in an internal search document, Heavey same day. Same person. 2 witnesses, 2 words that do not describe the same young man. And in the middle of that contradiction sits something Warren Hudson says he did that day that nobody has fully reckoned with yet. He says he and his friends begged Nolan to leave the island with them. Stir, hit that bell. Warren Hudson gave his first public interview on July 22nd to Brandon Tatum, sitting down for what has since become a multi-part series on the Officer Tatum Show. He described how he and Nolan became close. The two met in 8th grade, Hudson said, eating lunch together weekly, building what he called a very tight-knit friend group over the years that followed. He acknowledged something notable in that same interview. He never actually got to know Nolan's parents, Christine and Elmore Wansley. That admission matters because of what Christine Wansley herself has said publicly. Earlier this month, she stated she did not know Trayston Shepard, one of the 3 friends who traveled with Nolan to Horn Island. Well, despite Shepard describing himself as Nolan's close friend since 9th grade. 2 mothers worth of distance, in a sense, sitting between a set of friends who describe themselves as inseparable from Nolan and a family who says they simply did not know these young men in any depth. That gap does not prove anything by itself. Hudson described the scale of the gathering on Horn Island that day in specific terms. Boatloads of people, he said, by his estimate, more than 1,000 people and miles of boats stretched along the island's shore, calling it the single most popular day of the year to be on that water. His friend group, he said, grew and grew throughout the day, with everyone drinking and celebrating together, and in that same breath describing Nolan specifically. He was completely fine despite the alcohol. Hudson added a qualifier that matters. I talked to Nolan a couple times, he said, but it wasn't like I was strictly sitting there talking to Nolan the whole day. That is an important admission. Hudson is not claiming continuous direct observation of Nolan throughout the day. He is claiming an overall impression formed across scattered interactions in a crowd of over 1,000 people that Nolan seemed fine. That impression sits directly against the characterization contained in the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources' internal email sent the following evening, describing Nolan's alcohol intake as heavy. CNN has separately reported that it remains unclear how Marine Resources officials arrived at that specific characterization. 2 accounts, neither one backed by an actual toxicology report, which remains pending from both the state medical examiner and the independent pathologist the family hired. Hudson's completely fine and the official's heavy cannot both be describing the same continuous state with equal accuracy, though they could both be partially true, describing Nolan at different points across a very long day among a very large crowd, observed by people who were not watching him continuously themselves. Now, the specific claim that gives this story its title, in a later installment of the same interview series, Hudson said that he and his friends begged Nolan to leave Horn Island with them that day, begged him, not simply mentioned the boat was leaving. Not casually invited him along, begged. That word carries weight if accurate. It suggests Nolan's friends recognized something worth pushing back against. Whatever combination of factors made staying behind seem to them like the wrong choice for their friend to make. It positions the 3 friends not as people who casually left Nolan behind, but as people who tried and failed to talk him out of a decision he had already made for himself. That detail, if it holds up, cuts directly against the version of this story that has painted the friends as having simply abandoned Nolan without concern. It reframes their departure as a moment of frustrated persuasion rather than casual indifference. But it also raises its own uncomfortable question. If the group cared enough to beg Nolan to leave, if his safety was a concern significant enough to argue about, in the moment before the boat pulled away, what specifically were they worried about? Was it simply general caution, the kind any friend group might exercise before splitting up on a remote island? Or did it reflect something more specific? A read on the water conditions, a read on Nolan's own state after a day of drinking, a read on the girl he had just met, or a read on something else entirely that has not yet been made public? Hudson's account, as currently available, does not specify which of those concerns actually motivated the pleading. Hudson also laid out in detail what happened after the group realized Nolan was missing. He said one of his friends received an agitated phone call around 12:30 a.m. on July 5th, hours after they had last seen Nolan. About 30 minutes later, Hudson said, a group of roughly 10 people slammed open the door to the house where he and his friends were staying, visibly panicked that no one had heard from Nolan. Hudson said a person he recognized from high school was among that group, and the two stepped outside to talk. That person, according to Hudson, said he believed Nolan had probably just crashed on someone's couch somewhere on the island. An assessment Hudson says he agreed with at the time, given that Nolan had been drinking and, in Hudson's telling, was the type of person who might simply sleep off a long day rather than immediately resurface. Hudson has since said publicly that he initially believed the growing search effort was an overreaction. He also mentioned that one member of that panicked group, someone he described only as a mom, suggesting an adult chaperone or family friend present that night, specifically asked for Nolan's phone. That detail connects directly to a separate claim that has circulated in this case. That content was deleted from Nolan's phone before it was returned to his family. Hudson has addressed that claim directly in his interviews, though the full context of his response has not been widely detailed in public reporting beyond his acknowledgement that the subject came up. This is where Ben Crump's broader position on this case becomes directly relevant to Hudson's specific claims. Crump has not, in available public statements, responded point by point to the "we begged him to stay" detail specifically. What Crump has said repeatedly and consistently is that the overall account given by Nolan's friends contains contradictions serious enough to warrant a full, impartial investigation. Contradictions involving the sequence of who said what to whom, what happened to Nolan's phone, and why multiple independent witnesses have described events that do not fully align with what the friends themselves have said. Crump has also responded directly to Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves' public comments, framing outside advocacy as a source of division in this case, pushing back on the idea that scrutiny of the investigation itself amounts to unfair politicization, rather than a legitimate demand for transparency. Separately, reports indicate the three friends have received a litigation notice, the kind of formal legal communication typically sent to preserve evidence, including digital evidence, ahead of potential future proceedings. That development, even without a direct Crump quote attached to it, signals that the legal posture around this case has shifted from informal media disputes towards something with more direct legal consequence for the specific accounts each party has given. Within that broader framework, a new claim like "we begged him to stay safe" does not exist in isolation. It exists alongside everything else Crump has already flagged. The mystery surrounding the deleted phone content, the contradiction between the friend's account and the woman they say Nolan stayed behind for, and a timeline that, according to multiple witnesses interviewed separately, may extend well beyond what the friends have publicly described. A sympathetic detail, if true, does not erase a documented contradiction. It simply adds another piece to a story where sympathy and suspicion are, for now, sitting uncomfortably next to each other. Warren Hudson has pushed back hard against any suggestion of malice or racial motivation in his own account. "There is no racial component," he told Tatum directly. "If Nolan ever felt uncomfortable around us, which we never gave him a reason to, he wouldn't hang around with us," Hudson said. "I would never look at Nolan any other way than I would any of my other friends. He was like a brother to me." Trayston Shepard, appearing separately in the same interview series, responded directly to Christine Wansley's earlier statement that she did not know him well. Shepard said he met Nolan in 9th grade and came to think of him as his best friend. He also offered something more personal, describing the emotional weight he has carried since Nolan's death. "I'm already trying to mourn my friend's death as is," Shepard said, "and I'm beating myself up for it." He said he beats himself up over not being able to change how the events of July 4th played out, a statement of guilt and regret that sits alongside rather than resolves the specific factual contradictions Crump and independent witnesses have raised. Warren Hudson also gave an earlier interview to the New York Post describing the accusations circulating against him and his friends as hurtful. "It's a sick world we're living in," he said. "That frustration is, in its own way, understandable." 3 young men, still teenagers or barely out of their teens, have spent 3 weeks watching their names attached to national headlines, receiving what they describe as death threats serious enough to draw a separate FBI investigation, while simultaneously being asked to account for a friend's death under a level of public scrutiny most adults never face in their lifetimes. None of that changes what the physical evidence, the witness statements, and the eventual grand jury review will determine, but it does explain why Hudson's account, sympathetic in places, defensive in others, occasionally contradicting the official record on something as basic as how much his friend had actually been drinking, reads the way it does, like a young man trying to tell the truth as he remembers it, under pressure that would strain anyone's ability to keep every detail perfectly consistent. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. His best friend says he begged him to leave Horn Island that day. His best friend also says he was completely fine. A Marine Patrol official's email says his drinking was heavy. Neither account has been confirmed by toxicology results that remain, 3 weeks later, still pending. His friends say they cared about him like a brother. His family's attorney says the account they've given still does not add up. Both of those things may be true at once. 3 weeks of interviews, statements, and public defenses have produced sympathy for these young men and suspicion of their account in equal measure. And neither one has canceled the other out. If you have any real information about what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island, contact investigators directly tips.fi.gov or 1-800-CALL-FBI. The combined reward is now $125,000 FA. Hit that bell, a friend's plea. A word in an email. Another word from the person who was actually there. None of them alone is the answer. The grand jury, not cable news, is the only body that will eventually get to see all of it at once.